Hello, everyone. Welcome. Nice to see you all. Um, Let me just begin by telling you that I have a Beit Midrash in Los Angeles tomorrow night, and if you're in Los Angeles, you should come because I think I may have made a mistake in assuming that people want to spend their Hanukkah learning in a Beit Midrash. People are doing other things, so I don't. So I need prove me right that it was a good thing to have a Beit Midrash during Hanukkah because I have less registrations than I usually do. So I would like to learn with you, and I need people to learn with. So if you're free tomorrow night and you want to do some learning that is, of course, related to Hanukkah, and we'll have a candle lighting, and we'll have lots of stuff. But I have this Beit Midrash, and I deliberated over whether to do it on Hanukkah, and I'm not sure I made the right decision given the registrations. But maybe you can help me. We do, don't get me wrong. There's a minion of people coming already. It's not like you'll be the only one. But I want to really promote this Beit Midrash. The Worker Circle tomorrow night, 7 o'clock in Pico Robertson. Okay. That's just a desperate announcement on my part. Um, okay, so let's begin today. We're in Parshat Mikeitz, and this is, in some sense, what we have been heading towards all along. By which I mean not just surely we have been reading our way towards this parsha as we do every year when we restart the Torah, but we've been looking this year particularly at the theme of power in the book of Genesis, which isn't I suggested not isn't such an obvious theme. It's not the one we usually look for, but as we've been using that as our lens of focus, we've seen that power and leadership and kings and non-kings, as we talked about last time, raw brute force. These themes are all over the book of Genesis. And this week, we really get to, okay, we can find a little bit about Abraham's interactions with kings, and okay, we can find a little bit about Isaac's interaction with kings, but there's no one who has more of an interaction with a king in the book of Genesis than Joseph, who becomes very much a part of the state infrastructure and a leader, almost a king in his own right. So, it's an interesting thing. Like, who was the first Israelite king? And we would say Shaul, but there's a way in which it was Joseph. Like Joseph was the first to assume this role of power, and so Joseph is an important figure for us to think about as we as we continue to excavate this theme of power, which becomes so prominent and central and significant in Exodus and the rest of Tanakh. We're finding it already in Genesis. So that's our project, and today we're going to look at one aspect of Joseph's meteoric rise to power. Okay, so let's just say a blessing for those of us who are just learning Torah for the first time today. This is a mitzvah, so we say a blessing over it. I'll have you in mind. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so here's what I want to take a look at today. One aspect, I said, of Joseph's rise to power. And indeed, Joseph is, I just said, I just used the word meteoric, and that's because Joseph's in a prison dungeon at the beginning of this parsha, and within the first chapter, he's ruling over Egypt. So it's really like just a remarkable change of fortune. Um, and all of it happens because Pharaoh is looking for a dream interpreter. And if we've been reading, we know Joseph has already proven himself to be a worthy dream interpreter. And as we'll soon see, Joseph's interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams is so pleasing to Pharaoh that immediately he's put in charge. Okay, here's what I want to look at today. I'm calling this shiur the trappings of power. The trappings of power. And that is because what I want to look at in particular is not just the rise to power itself, not just the exercise of that power, but I want to look today at the way that power holders um, are um, are what's the right word here? Are sort of adorned in the trappings of power. Actually, like literally in this case, dressed up in the trappings of power. What does it? What does it mean to look like you are a leader? And what does it mean that leaders are expected to present a certain kind of in this case, we're going to see a very physical image to the world around. And of course, the deeper question is, why? Why is that important? Okay, so I'm really talking about clothing, but not just clothing, all of the trappings. It's a great word, trappings, all of the sort of like exterior features of power. And when it comes to Joseph, clothing is already a major theme. Before this Parsha, and I think I looked it up and I've taught a class here in this in this group 4 years ago on just the clothing that appears in Joseph's story. And that in itself is pretty interesting, right? Joseph very notably gets that Ketonet Pasim, that coat of many colors. And clothes and their role in Joseph's story are interesting throughout. When Eshet Potiphar wants to sleep with Joseph, she grabs his garment and he has to slip away from it. So there's like this is even in little ways we see the theme of Joseph's clothing. Oh, the Joseph's coat was stained with blood and shown to his father. That this comes up again and again, and it was in that class we just thought about what it is about Joseph that is so exterior and projected, and we'll think about those themes, the aesthetics of Joseph in this class. But I want to focus in particular here in Parshat Mikeitz. I want to focus in particular in the very um, quick succession of form changes that Joseph undergoes when he is brought into Pharaoh's court first, and then eventually tapped to be a leader. So it's actually, if we pause and really take a look at this, it's quite striking. And I want to just meditate on this scene where Joseph is dressed up in the trappings of power together. So let's take a look. And I'm going to put this. I think Ariel has already done this, but I'm going to put our source sheet in the chat again. And let's just start by taking a look at just the very first moment. Even this is just a detail, but it sets a tone. The very first moment when Pharaoh is told, "Oh, there's a guy in the prison, a young Hebrew who knows how to interpret dreams." So Pharaoh wants to see him, and immediately Vishlach Paro v'yikra et Yosef. Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was rushed from the dungeon, from the pit, and then Vaigalach Vaichalef Simlotav Vayavo el Paro. He was shaven and given a change of clothing, and he appeared before Pharaoh. Now, that might we might miss that detail because okay, yeah, it's not so strange to imagine that someone brought before a king would be prepared if they had been rotting in a dungeon. Although we might have imagined, he's a lowly prisoner. Maybe he would just appear that way. But no, he was shaven and given a change of clothing. And it isn't just that he had his haircut, he was shaven. The word is shaven. And that's interesting, right? Especially in a tradition, I don't know what it was like back then, but in a tradition where we prize our beards and our hair in general to be shaven, that's not just to be given a haircut, but to be really stripped down. Okay? So first Joseph is stripped down, and not the first time Joseph has been stripped, actually. As I've mentioned before, Joseph has his clothing taken off of him already. But here it has specifically to do with Joseph's entering into the halls of power. And Rashi notes this by saying something that, again, might seem pretty obvious, but actually I think has a significant tone setting purpose here, which is Rashi says he was shaven mipnei kvod malchut. He was shaven out of respect for the king, or literally out of respect for royalty, for the kingship. Okay? So there's some idea already right away that if you're going to um, come into contact with a powerful person, a king, a pharaoh, you'd better be prepared. And, again, is that such a chiddush, a revelation? Surely, if I went to Buckingham Palace or the White House, I would dress up. Okay, but the language here is specifically that he has to be shaven out of respect for the. I mean, I don't imagine I would shave if I went to Buckingham Palace, right? Like, there's something you actually have to follow a specific protocol, and it's extreme to like to the skin. Okay, so that's just to note that this is already happening from the very first moment Joseph is snatched up. But it is the next scene that I want to spend really the bulk of our time on because this is this scene, and I saw in the chat that Leah was already noting this. Doesn't Joseph get a ring and a bunch of things placed on him? So that's right. We're going to be looking at that sort of adornment in this scene where basically what happens is that Pharaoh repeats his dream, two dreams. Joseph tells Pharaoh, this is the meaning of the dreams. Actually, they have one meaning, and here's what you should do to prepare. The meaning of the dreams is there's going to be a famine, and here's what you should do to prepare for that. And Joseph seems to know what he's talking about, and I have some theories about why it is that Pharaoh is so immediately impressed. Joseph uses some of the language that Pharaoh himself, we saw, like when Pharaoh was dreaming, that some of the same language. But anyway, that's for another class. Why is it that Joseph is so immediately convincing? But he is, and Pharaoh says, "Oh my gosh!" And here we enter into Pharaoh's delight and acceptance, immediate acceptance of Joseph, and then very quickly tapping Joseph to be his second in command. And then immediately we get these trappings of power. So let's take a look at what happens to Joseph here. And you can count, or make a note. You could try like how many items, how many trappings, how many features of adornment Joseph is quickly wrapped up in. Okay, so Pharaoh said to his servants, "Hanitza kaze ish asher ruach Elokim bo? Could we find another like this person who has the spirit of God in him?" Because Joseph's an incredible dream interpreter. Where is he getting this from? And Joseph has said the interpretations come from God. So there's that spirit of God hovering inside of Joseph. And Pharaoh says, "Look, it's obvious since, Achrei hodia Elokim otcha et kol hazot, ein navon v'chacham kamocha." Since God told you all this, you're obviously, there's no one as discerning and wise of you. So here we go. Atatiel beiti, you'll be in charge of my house. Va'al picha yishak kol ami, and by your command all my people shall be directed. Rak hakiseh egdal mimecha. Only in terms of the throne itself will I be superior to you. Only in and it sounds like Pharaoh is saying, and really that's just a formality, right? Like you will be in charge. I will technically be the king of Egypt. I am the Pharaoh, and I will sit on the throne, but really you're completely in charge. It's almost like, Raka Kise, you basically are the king of Egypt. Um, and then, just to like, place a punctuation on it. Vayomer Paro el Yosef, Re'eh natati otcha al kol Eretz Mitzrayim. See, I place you in charge of all of the land of Egypt. Okay, so that's it. There it is. Joseph, within verses, is like goes from a slave to a king, so to speak. And then then come the trappings. Vayasar paro et tabato me'al yado v'yitenota al yad Yosef. Pharaoh removed the ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. Okay, so first he gives him a ring. That's nice. If that was all it would just be a nice, you're the king, and here this is the official gesture making it so. But it's more than that. Vayalbeshoto bigdei shesh. and he dressed Joseph in robes of fine linen. Vayasem revid hazahav al tzavaro, and he put a gold chain about his neck. And this language of on his neck. I mean, it's reveed, so it's a nice gold chain, but there's something about it that feels, and here I want to begin to hint to you what I am wondering about is the way in which Joseph is not just dressed, but almost enveloped, almost like covered, wrapped up. And it seems like there's a binding element to this. So when we read that he had a golden chain on his neck, of course that's where you put a necklace, but there's also something about it that feels like Pharaoh's got him by the neck. So I want to start to hint at that feeling that I get from this passage. And, I see if you get that same feeling, and you will continue to explore what exactly is going on here. But let's finish. We had a ring, we had robes, we had a gold chain, and now v'yarkevoto b'mir kevet hamishne asher lo. He had him ride in the chariot of his second in command, so placing him in a chariot, and everybody cried out before him, Avrech. And this is like it's debated what this means. Does it mean like I will bless you, or does it mean kneel before me, like birkayim, or does it mean something else, like related to? Is it an Egyptian word? Lots of theories on what this means, but he goes out in the chariot and they all shout Avrech, Avrech. Okay, and then he's in the land of Egypt, and it might be okay, that was his formal getup, and that's all there is to it. But there's more. There's more trappings here of power, and in some ways, the next part is even more subsuming of Yosef than these clothes were, because then Pharaoh says, "I am ani paro." I am Pharaoh, but without you, no one shall lift a hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And, right, there's another statement of you are in charge. And then, Vayikra Paro Shem Yosef Tzofnat Paneach. Then Paro gave Yosef a new name, the name Tzafnat Paneach. Again, lots of debates about what this means, but, in the Hebrew, we would read this as the interpreter of hidden things. It may mean something different in the Egyptian or whatever ancient language this is borrowing from, but for the Hebrew reader, Joseph is given a name that means the interpreter of hidden things. But in the context of the story, Pharaoh is giving Joseph an Egyptian name. Not an unusual feature for any immigrant to consider taking on a name that matches the surroundings. But here Pharaoh gives it to him very intentionally, and not only that, v'yiten lo et osnat bat potifera kohen on liisha, and he gave him a wife. He gave him a wife, and the wife seems to be the daughter of the very man who had first purchased Joseph, in whose dungeon Joseph had just been rotting. So there's a real change of fortune here, but also he's married off. And he's married off to an Egyptian woman. Okay? And that's how Joseph emerged in charge of the land of Egypt. Okay. So you see, it's like Joseph's got a new name, a new wife, a new set of clothing. He's got chains and rings and a carriage. I'm imagining like the Pope Mobile, it's like there's a carriage and it goes around, and he's like a really, and I can't help but admit that I have the feeling that Joseph is in a box. That Joseph is being wrapped up like a package, and Pharaoh is delighted to have Joseph, but also is very much keeping Joseph. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to know what you think. What do you make of this? What is going on in Pharaoh's mind as Pharaoh not just appoints Joseph to this position, but suddenly is throwing things on him and changing his name and his identity, and just why is this so important that it deserves all of this florid description of Joseph's sort of new image. Okay, let's start with Dale. Dale, Zin, and if we can see you, that'd be great. I think we're not hearing you either, though.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Okay,
there we
there
do.
we
Okay,
go.
go for it.
I just think that Pharaoh is setting Joseph up to own him. It's like, you're mine.
Yeah.
I've given you everything that I want to give you. And because I gave you everything that I want to give you, like you were talking about in the beginning,
Mhm.
having him grabbed by his neck. It's like, because I gave you everything I gave you, I now own you.
Yeah,
And so
good.
that's what I mean.
That's nice. It's nicely put, Dale. You know you can imagine he's like wearing the uniform of the state, and you can almost imagine that it says on the side like property of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. It really it does feel that way. Like Pharaoh's delighted in bringing him to this position of power, but we are surely supposed to worry as Joseph. We're not just pure celebrating Joseph's like promotion. We're supposed to worry that Joseph is being taken, that he's being owned, as Dale puts it. Other thoughts? Sparrow's motivation here, or I might say, like, just in a bigger picture way, I want you to start thinking about what is what does it mean that we might want someone um, to not to dress the part, to be someone who is a leader, to act like a leader, to have the name of a leader, to have the wife of a leader. Like, what is going on here? Okay, Rich, let's hear from Rich.
I just think about the expression golden handcuffs,
Hmm.
and it feels like he's wearing the golden handcuffs. And um, I imagine also that, I mean, if you take a look at the way power is doled out in modern administrations, people are kind of happy to step up to it, suck up to it. And this is probably the norm that Pharaoh is used to dealing with, that people are happy to respond to this kind of investment, literally and
Yeah.
figuratively.
Yeah, good. That's good. First of all, great image. The golden handcuffs, right? That's another way of describing the kind of like gift which is a trap. But yeah, it is like as Rich was saying, there's something about this that is not so. It's notable the way the story tells it, but it's not so surprising that someone is expected to dress the part and to adapt to the norms of the not of power, sure, but also just of that country and that society. You are now a representative of Egypt, so you have to look like Egypt, you know. And I like what does that mean in other contexts? What does it mean to like you know to look American, right? And that's obviously, as I say that, that's like so loaded because like who looks American and who doesn't look American? But also not just like physically, but what would it mean to run for president and wear a t-shirt and jeans? Is that okay? Why is that not okay? Or to run for president and have a long beard, right? Why does nobody do that? Like there's certain things that we simply expect someone to do when they are and then, we might expect people to look like a man when they are running for power, right? And then Hillary Clinton needs to think about like the pantsuit and is this the like all of that thinking because she doesn't fit the image of power that's been established in this society. So there's lots of issues that suddenly get kicked up here. Let's hear some more interpretation from Leah Matsui.
It's so cool that we read this, I think, pretty much around or on Hanukkah, because for me, it's about Joseph, unacceptable as he is, and needs to be assimilated into the foreign society, into it's for me, it's a real good parallel into the Hellenism that the upper classes, the Jews of the upper classes, gobbled up, accepted, and other Jews rejected.
Good. Yeah, that's right. That's an important and really strong connection that Leah's making. We always read Parshat Mikeitz during Chanukah, and so it is that Yosef becomes a kind of archetype for the struggle, which we reflect on in Hanukkah, the struggle to absorb an outside culture, but resist an outside culture, to be like, to be a main. Either Joseph represents assimilation because he becomes so thoroughly Egyptian, or he becomes a representative of the opposite, the one who maintains his character despite the trappings of Egyptianness that are upon him. And that's also part of what I want us to start thinking about is what becomes different between Joseph's outsides and Joseph's insides. Like as Joseph is encased in these trappings, who's in there? Who is that? Is Joseph himself being changed? I mean, he has a new wife now. Surely his life is he's becoming Egyptian. Okay? And with that said, I want to make another connection that I think is as I've said that this parsha has a kind of recurring um, theme of Joseph being kind of formed or covered over. And so I can't help but I just want to mention something that maybe some of you are thinking about already. But as we say that Joseph is first, shaved and given a change of clothing, and then turned really into a full blown the image of a pharaoh here, then we certainly have to wonder, to think, to note that later in the Parsha, we have this famous scene where Yosef is now totally in charge, and he is the one who dispenses rations to people. And Yosef's brothers came looking for food and bowed down low to him with their faces to the ground. And Yosef saw his brothers, vayakrem, he recognized them, vayitnaker alehem, but he made himself foreign to them. He made himself foreign to them. Okay. And he spoke harshly to them, and he said, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan, to procure food." And vayaker Yosef et achav vahem lo hikiruhu. Joseph recognized his brothers, but they didn't recognize him. This is like a major plot point, that Joseph is able to stand in front of his brothers and they don't recognize him. Now, why is that? How could it be that they didn't recognize their brother? He hasn't changed that much, right? They didn't recognize their own brother, who they, big drama in their lives, they sold into slavery all those. Has it really been that long? Okay, so listen to Nachmanides debate the possibilities for why it is that they didn't recognize him. And Nachmanides, the Ramban, medieval Spanish commentator, says the following. Joseph saw his brothers and he recognized him. Miyad shira'otam hikiram. He recognized them right away. And ufachad ulai yakiruhu. And he worried they would recognize him. So what did he do? He made himself strange to them. Vayitnaker alehem. How? Shesam ha-mitznefet al mitzcho. He put a turban on his forehead and had it covering part of his face. Vishina atzmo. And he changed his appearance. He changed himself. Okay? So the Ramban imagines that these clothes have actually now become a kind of a disguise. And even, most of the time he doesn't have to worry someone's going to recognize his face. But in this case, where his brothers are in front of him, it's like he tilts the turban down. He hides himself in his clothes. Like these clothes themselves are now a kind of protective shield that keeps him from being identified. And just to make, the point, to give it a little bit of argument here, take a look. The Ramban that we just read, he cites Rashi, who has a different interpretation. Rashi, an earlier commentator, he says Rashi wrote that the word "he made himself," what I translated, "he's made himself foreign," For the Ramban, he made himself look strange by putting a turban on his forehead. For Rashi, he made himself like a stranger. Nasalahem kinochri. Not strange, but like a stranger or like a foreigner. And he did it with his words by speaking to them harshly. Okay, so according to Rashi's opinion, the word Yidnaker signifies that he spoke to them like a stranger, ke'ish nochri. And then, of course, only the Ramban can do this. Ve'enenu nachon. And Rashi is not right about that. Okay, so, like, I would never say such a thing, but of course, the Ramban is very comfortable just saying Rashi's wrong about that. But what we have there between Rashi and the Ramban is a debate, and I think a significant one, around what it is that Yosef has gained that allows him to conceal himself, or what skill or tactic that allows him to conceal himself. And Nachmanides says, well, it's his clothes. It is the actual trappings of his office that he can hide inside of. So we imagine Yosef wrapped up in the garments and the chains and all of the trappings and he can sort of disappear into them. So that's interesting. But then Rashi says, no, it's not that he actually dresses different. It's that he has learned to speak as if he is different. And I actually think that Rashi's answer is at least equally compelling, and maybe they're not so different from one another. Rashi's saying he learned how to act like a foreigner. What was it, his accent, or just the manner of his speech, or did he just speak like a pharaoh? Did he know how to speak like a pharaoh? And of course, this is a debate. Was it his clothes or was it his behavior? But of course, we can imagine, I'd like to ask you to imagine how these two things might be related. Like, what is it that has happened to Yosef over these years that has transformed him both externally, and maybe the external has an effect on the internal? He's been transformed internally as well. Okay, so I want to turn back to you again and ask what you think of this moment of Yosef's ability to to estrange himself, to disappear inside of his office, and what does that mean for Yosef psychologically? What does that mean for thinking about someone sitting inside the seat of power? Any thoughts on that? David.
Hi. Yeah, I'm wondering if the emblem, two things. One, you talked about him being ensconced in this new exterior and questioning the interior vis-a-vis the exterior. And I think perhaps the emblemization might be to demonstrate the gravitas of his appointment to the people, right?
Mm.
So he's, as someone said, he's branded Egypt. And so they'll accept his word because he's not Paro. And just because Paro said it in a back room doesn't mean that an edict went out to all of Egypt to let everybody know. And the elevation of Joseph also frees Paro from having to deal with the people. Read riffraff or ame haaretz as we might say in Hebrew, and gives him potential plausible deniability. That is, gives Paro. And I think what he also is doing, as you just alluded to, is now giving or modeling that behavior for Joseph to be able to have that same plausible deniability by hiding within the trappings of the turban when having his conversation with his brothers. And
Okay.
then he can decide how he wants to approach it from a seat of control and power rather than opening the wounds up directly.
Okay, that was just so helpful. Thank you, David. Lots of illumination there that David offers us. First of all, David takes us back a few steps, and here we are, at my lead, already kind of speculating on Joseph's psychology. But let's just take a step back and ask, why why all of the focus on exteriors? And David says, and I think rightly and wisely, that there's something just very practical. If you're going to be a representative of the land, you have to not just look the part, but to convey that you are in fact, an emissary of Pharaoh. We know that there's a Pharaoh. Who's this guy? You know, but if I wear my Make America Great Again hat, like who I am working for, right? Like there's like, lav deal. But like, you know what I mean? Like there's some way in which you have to show that you're wearing the badge. You're part of the okay, so that's and it's important. And David said, as as David sort of began to reflect on this, David also said something interesting, which is that it becomes a way that as long as you represent the authority, the state, then like I can just put you out in the trappings of the state, and you're now holding the decision, and I can remove myself from it. And like I can just wrap you up and get you to do things for me, and I've absolved myself maybe from responsibility, but certainly from duty. And here I just one last thing that David suggested, which I thought was intriguing, that Joseph may have by now learned that trick. That if you can just put out the image, well, then you can remove yourself from the situation, and it just becomes like the the Pharaoh standing in front of you. And I must say, the this all this all echoes nicely another phenomenon that we see in the Torah, which is that there are many pharaohs. Okay, we often speak about them all as just Pharaoh, but even in the beginning of Exodus, Moshe leaves and then Pharaoh dies and Moshe comes back, and you're sort of like, you have to really pause to realize that the Pharaoh that Moshe ends up doing battle with is not the Pharaoh that he was raised with, and but it's almost unnoticeable because it's the ultimate embodiment of power. If you're holding the title Pharaoh, it doesn't matter. You're the Caesar, you're the Pharaoh, you're the king. It doesn't matter who you are, right? Like you're just the next, again, Lahavdil, but you're the next pope. You just have the title. You represent you're not who you are anymore. Okay. So that's all very, very interesting. So I thank you for that, David. All right. Some more hands. Let's see what folks have to say. Diane.
It occurs to me that it's been several years since Joseph has seen his brothers, and he didn't have a really good experience when he last saw them. So I can understand why he wouldn't say, "Oh, you're here. I'm so glad," because who knows what if they're still wanting to kill him, So it's heartbreaking to see him have to go through this travesty, but I think it's very wise of him to not rush into trying to reestablish a relationship with them. Excuse me. And he also, I think I'll just leave it there.
All right. So let's just sort of underscore some of what Diane said, because there is I think there is this tension between the strategic element here, which is smart. I mean, Joseph has some skill. He is a master of subterfuge. So there's something about the kind of the spycraft here that is impressive on the one hand, and yet, as Diane wonders, there's also like we have to wonder. I am asking us to wonder about what kind of withering effect that has on someone's psychology, and that's part of what I'm thinking about here. And as Diane says, it's really it really comes to the fore when Joseph meets his brothers. On the one hand, boy, he is able to trick them. On the other hand, imagine what it is to say, I am confronting my brothers who sold me into slavery, and my response is just to disappear, is to withdraw into this shield of some other character that so there's something about that doesn't sound psychologically whole. And so there's an anxious feeling that I think Diana is highlighting for us. Okay, Kathy. Kobayashi. Do I have to ask you to unmute? It seems that
Yeah,
people
yeah,
are.
yeah.
Okay,
There it
great.
goes. Yeah, so what I have sort of fits in a bit. So this whole, first of all, the question of like, how could they not recognize him, right? And I guess I've always assumed that they're coming in and they don't actually look him in the face, like that you don't go stare at a king or somebody very powerful, that you're kind of sort of down low, and you have this, you're in their presence, and so you see them, but you don't actually see necessarily stare them in the face. That's kind of, I don't know, I've always kind of
That's really good. I think that's really good what Kathy's saying because it
yeah,
sounds
so
right. Like there's something rude about just sort of confronting directly. You're obsequious and you're bowed low and you don't look them in the face. And then, of course, then there's something hugely symbolic about that. It's like
right,
you don't
right.
actually see the face of the leader. It's not the person, it's the office. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, but it's also, I think it addresses this whole question of the internal and the external, because, on the one hand, in the presence, when you're not looking the king in the face, you do see the trappings. You see the trappings, but you don't see the face. You don't see the eyes. And there is this way in which that people can have trappings, but that I don't know, at least I feel like we have the sense that to a person it's hard to hide themselves when you really look them in the face and
Yeah.
see their eyes, and so it's, you can have the trappings, and yes, it can be, like you say, a kind of withering effect of like, where is he really? But he could still be himself, but
Yeah.
be able to hide that internal self because they're not looking at his face. So
That's fascinating. And Kathy, I love the way you're highlighting the eyes, the window to the soul, they sometimes say. The eyes as we can imagine like one feature that you just can't change. Sometimes I watch like science fiction movies and it's like they're trying to escape and they have to put in like contacts, contact lenses, or somehow surgically change their eyes because we do have this sense that, our whole faces change anyway, but there's something about our eyes that if you could see our eyes, you would really see into our souls, but also you would really be able to identify us here. So the idea um, that it's just a haunting thing to imagine Joseph as completely changed, but to have Joseph's eyes still looking back out there, right? That's an image I'll be taking with me. David Guberman.
Thank you. Barbanel has an explanation for this encounter that leads me to think Yosef is more acculturated than assimilated. And I'm speculating, I mean, perhaps Barbanel was basing himself on the fact that Yosef, we learn later, is intending to take care of his family's needs because of the famine and wants to bring the family and his father down from Canaan. And Abarbanel says that lots of people were coming down from Canaan because of the family, and Yosef was expecting them, but he was afraid that he would be revealed because precisely because he wanted to help them, that he would be accused of favoring foreigners and spending Egyptian money on behalf of foreigners. And at the same time, he was afraid that his brothers still hated him. So he makes himself appear strange and speaks to them the way he does, both to test them and to conceal from the Egyptian court his connection to them.
Okay, this is a really interesting point that we have not made yet. So I appreciate David bringing this in. That there could be an element in Yosef, and I think in general, when we think about someone learning how to look the part, that they don't want to be seen for who they were. That like they want like they put on a suit and they shave and they become now the image of the politician, of the leader. And for Yosef's purpose, there, as David says, Abarbanel suggests there are other reasons he's worried about the dynamics in the court. But it also reminds me that, when someone moves from one, subculture into the dominant culture, very often they don't want people to know where they came from. They don't want to be associated with they learn to speak differently. They learn to dress differently. Maybe they have the trophy wife or husband. Like there's a certain caricature of a leader that is trying to escape the like their origins. So I thought that's and the way that David played that out is fascinating in the particulars of Joseph's situation, but I think in general is a really interesting point. Did we have one more comment from Richard Fogel?
Yes, thank you. Um, I had read something recently about Jacob after wrestling with the angel, that many, many years later, that Jacob had to be willing to come down to Egypt. He would be willing if he'd heard that his son Joseph was still alive. He would not be willing if he still thought his son was dead or something, and he was hanging out in the promised land that was given to him, and he'll never leave. He has no reason to go to Egypt.
Yes, and so tell me your point.
That that a lot of this is being set up so that Jacob eventually will come to Egypt. He will see his father and all of his brothers again, but on Joseph's terms.
Yeah, interesting. There's a related question here, sort of related directly to what Richard's saying, which is why is it that Yosef never sent for his father? Like, it's all those years, it wasn't his father's fault. Like, he's in charge of all of Egypt. Why doesn't he use some of that power to, okay, he hates his brothers, but surely he loved his father and wanted his father to come down. And yet, Yosef, all of those years before this encounter, has obscured himself. And, you know, like, why? What is it that Joseph is hiding? Joseph names his child Menashe. His firstborn child is Menashe. Ki nashani Elohim et kol amali vet kol beit avi. Because God has caused me to forget all of my suffering and my father's house. Like Joseph wants to forget who he is. He wants to detach from where he's come from, and we don't know exactly why. And there is something about that is vexing. There's a lot of conversation about, in the commentaries about why that is. Okay, I have 8 minutes left, and I have a big chiddush for you to end with. Okay, like I thought about this and thought about this and thought about this. I really enjoyed contemplating this, but I kind of came up short when it came to commentary, because I kept thinking I want to commentate. I'm looking for a commentator who sees what I see, which is that Joseph is being swallowed up by the trappings of power, that Joseph is being kind of consumed by this adornment. And I kept looking for some midrash or commentary that said essentially that Pharaoh is dressing Joseph up in order to kind of submerge him into his a lot of what we've been speculating on. Does anybody say that? Is there any commentators that say that Joseph was somehow being absorbed or swallowed up by all of these trappings of power? And I don't know. I had a hard time finding something, I thought maybe that's just too modern, maybe too kind of like psychological to say like you're swallowed up into the trappings of power. Maybe that's not the way the ancient narrative works. So I was thinking about this, and then all of a sudden, I'm excited about this, but I'm not sure about it. All right, so see what you think. But all of a sudden, I remembered I kept thinking the language of swallowing up, the language of. But then I thought, oh, that language of swallowing up is in our parsha. It's in our parsha. So take a look at this. Where is the language of swallowing up? It's in Pharaoh's dreams. Well, take a look at Pharaoh's dreams here. Now, I just want to make a connection that I think is really, for me, exciting. I'm going to be thinking about this. I don't know. You'll tell me what you think of it. But um, Pharaoh's dreams are such that he sees seven handsome, beautiful cows coming up out of the Nile, and then all of a sudden, seven ugly, gaunt, bad cows come and they eat the handsome cows. Okay, the handsome cows, yafot mare, is what beautiful of appearance. Okay, and then the stalks of grain come up again. There are healthy ones, and then there are scorched ones. And here's the language that I was remembering: the thin grain swallowed up the full grain, swallowing up. Okay, now that in itself, just the fact that there's a word swallowing, that's not enough to make a connection. But I realized that the language in both of these dreams, now, in the first time that Pharaoh actually has the dreams, the language is handsome or yafot mare. And then the second time when Pharaoh tells the dream, he shifts the language slightly, yafot toar, which is a little different, beautiful of form, well formed. So handsome and well formed cows and grains, okay? And I just then suddenly it clicked for me that last week in last week's Parsha, none other than Yosef himself was described as Yafeh Toar v'Yafeh Mareh, well formed and handsome. Okay, so like Joseph is well formed and handsome. His look is beautiful and full and healthy and good and young and vital and all of these things. And then Pharaoh has this dream, and then in the dream, the good-looking, well-formed, handsome things are consumed, are swallowed up by ugly, bad, devastating things. And what is the first dream? What is the first dream feature? What are the things that consume the handsome cows? The lean, the ugly cows. What's the word for cow? Para, or parot, right? So I don't know. I don't know whether to make something of it, but like we have this linguistic connection between the well-formed and handsome cows, and then the parot. Like Paro has a dream, and in which the parot cows, Pharaoh cows. Okay, so you see what I'm trying to do here. If I'm right that there is a kind of literary echo in the dreams of images that we've associated with Yosef, then it may be that the dreams themselves, they have a meaning for Egypt, but they also have a meaning for Yosef. And maybe it's a meaning that he missed, right? He got the application to Egypt, but maybe part of what the dreams are saying is that you're going to be swallowed up. You're going to be swallowed up by something that is not healthy, something that is not good, something that is not well formed, but you're going to be put in this position because you are healthy and well formed, that they're going to want you and they're just going to swallow you alive. Okay? So that's like I think that I don't know. It's like hard to say, but there are some strong linguistic connections here in the handsome and well formed. These are not the only places we see this, but they are in very close proximity, this language of handsome and well-formed. And then, as I said, the other word I was playing with is the word paro for Pharaoh, and then the word parot for cows. Okay, so what do you think? What do you think? Is that a good chiddush? You like it? Not bad, right? Not bad. All right, let's give Rav Meira, the last word here.
One thing that also struck me so much about the first dream was that after the skinny cows eat the fat cows. I think it's when Pharaoh repeats his dream, they look as skinny as before.
Yeah.
They don't get any better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Let's take a look here. But
It
when they
might
had
be,
consumed them, one could not tell that they had consumed them, for they looked just as bad as before. And then I awoke. So there is, I like that you picked up on that detail, Mira, because there's something about like there's something ominous, obviously, about this dream, but also ominous about the idea that Joseph is being celebrated for his wisdom and his connection to God and so he's brought into this power on the strength of those merits. But is it the case that he's actually going to be consumed by a system that is so annihilating that he will not survive it? He will not maintain himself. He will be consumed by this force of destruction. Here's the last thing I'll say. In last week's Parsha, one of the things that we keep reading about Yosef is that God was with him. God is with Yosef. Whatever Yosef does, he's in the dungeon, he's in his master's house, but he's always finds favor because V'Hashem et Yosef, God was with Joseph. That's all over last week's Parsha. We don't find it at all in this week's Parsha. That phrase doesn't appear at all in this week's Parsha. And one wonders, like he gets to the halls of power on the strength of his connection to God. But as he is being swallowed up by those halls of power, is there something in that connection once so strong that snaps, or at least is muted for a time until Joseph is able to reveal himself again? And once Joseph reveals himself again, then he begins speaking about God with full throat. So lots to watch out for here as we continue to follow Joseph's story into the last two parshot of Genesis. And we've been doing a good job of tracking this theme of power throughout Genesis, but we're now really in the belly of the beast, right? To coin a phrase. Okay, that's it for this week. I will see you all next week. We will have a class. It will be Erev Christmas, but we will have a class, and I hope to see some of you here. And wishing you all a good rest of your week and a Shabbat Shalom.